Hi, Peter Charles here, and have you been having trouble focusing these Voigtlander lenses on Fujifilm bodies, especially when you're dealing with the wider lenses like the 23 and the 18? Well, there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why we're not getting good results, myself included. I've seen lots of complaints online, and I've had my own complaints. What's going on, and how do we correct it? Okay, here's the problem in a nutshell. You are focusing on a distant subject and you're stopped way down, let's say f11, f16, even f22, and you want to get as much in focus as possible. And when you look at the image afterwards, you can't see where it's critically sharp. It doesn't look to be critically sharp. Then you start to think, is the lens soft? You know, and no, it isn't. I mean, I've done these tests afterwards and everything was lovely and sharp. So what was the problem? Why am I not getting a really sharp image? And I've read in comments on various videos, people saying, well, you've got lots of depth of field, everything should be sharp. No. That's problem number one, is there a lot of the expectations around depth of field is that it's sort of like it stays, everything stays nice and sharp, then it drops off a cliff. That's not how it works. I'm going to put up a diagram which will show that you have a best plane of focus. You get a best focus point. And that is where the lens is critically sharp, even at f22. And then as you get further from that point, both in front of the subject and behind the subject, it gets softer and softer and softer. And there becomes a point in that range where the technical people will say it's still, you know, within the depth of field, it's still sharp. Now it's no longer sharp, but it doesn't drop off a cliff. It's a straight line. And the further you are away from that best focus point, the more your subject will be out of focus. So the key when we're using these lenses, especially the wide angle lenses, and we're stopping down to f11, f16, f22, and everything is not really sharp, it's because we've relied on the depth of field and we haven't really got the focus nailed as to where the subject really is and where it should be critically sharp, our best focus point. So here's the problem. We have to be able to put that best focus point on the subject. And so, you know, the subject is critically sharp, but the rest of it is still reasonably sharp, but it's starting to drop off the further away we get or the closer to the camera we get. The focus will start to drop off. As I say, it gets past a certain point and it's considered out of focus. One of the technical reference points I ran across was 20 lines per millimeter. Once you couldn't resolve that, you're considered out of focus or beyond the depth of field of the lens. So what's going on? Okay, here we have my 50 f1.2 Voigtlander, and when I stop down, you can see the lens is stopping down. I'll open it back up again. So you can see the lens stops down when you turn the focus, the aperture ring. Now let's do the same thing with the Fujifilm lens. These are both f1.2, by the way. Now I'll turn I'll turn the aperture ring. See anything change? Nope. So here's what's going on with the Fujifilm lenses. They are electronically coupled to the aperture. So when you turn the ring, nothing happens until you press the focusing button. And this is like the old film lenses from years ago. They did exactly the same thing. They were wide open the entire time you have them on front of the camera, and they only stop down when you press the shutter release. All right, and then they'd open right back up again. So it gave you a bright image, and you could focus quite well because the depth of field was quite shallow. So I'm going to show what's going on with another camera here, and we're going to show you what focus peaking looks like and what happens when you stop down or leave it wide open. And this is where we get into the problems of not being able to find our critical focus point, where it is we have our critical sharpness. So let's have a look at this. Okay, to illustrate the problems that we have with focusing with the Voigtlander lenses, I'm using my XH2 at the moment with the 56mm f1.2 Fujifilm lens on it. I'm in manual focus, aperture priority. Right now I am at f1.2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop down. And first, before I do that, I'm going to show you the way focus peaking, I've set to red high. And you can see as I'm changing the plane of focus, you see that's our critical point of focus right there, right in the middle of those red bands, halfway across roughly, or a little bit close to us. Now, if I want to actually get in a little tighter, I can use the back dial to magnify this, so I can actually get a very precise focus. Very good for macro. And there's the tightest focus, as you can see. And that's taking the focus check and really drilling in. So if I take it out of focus check mode, there is the aperture, the depth of field, I should say, at f1.2 aperture. Now I'm going to stop down all the way to f16. Do you see any change? Oh, it's f14. Let's go one step more. There we go, f16. Do you see any change? No. There's no change in the focus peaking. It's still showing us our critical focus. So if I use my focus check, I'm getting the same results at f16 as I was getting at f1.2. And this makes it very easy to focus a Fujifilm lens on manual focusing, even though the focus is not mechanically connected, it's electronically connected. You can see it's easy to find that best point of your focus. Now we're going to do this again, only we're going to do it with a Voigtlander 50mm f1.2. Okay, I've changed lenses. I have the Voigtlander 50mm f1.2 on my Fujifilm X-H2. And we'll look at the same scenario that we did with the 56mm Fujifilm lens. So if I change my focus point, you can see the red peaking moving. And I can, again, magnify if I want to. And you can see where the focus points are. Now I am all the way out and to seeing a full view. And I'm just going to bring this down to f16 and look as I stop down how much of that keyboard is shown as in focus, how much that red peaking spreads. There is f16. You can see my bookcase behind coming into focus. Pretty well the entire keyboard is shown in focus. And here's the problem. When we're using wide angle lenses, the entire scene is shown in focus, but critically, our critical focus is sort of like 2/3 the way along towards us. Roughly where the square is in the scene right now, that's roughly our critical focus point, or maybe a little bit behind it. But the problem is, at f16, we can't see that critical focus. If I ratchet out, you'll get an idea where it is, right there. So that's where our critical focus is. But when we're all the way out to f16, where is it? Can you tell where it is? I can't tell where it is. And that's the problem we get into when we're using Voigtlander lenses and we stop them right down and we're using something like focus peaking. Well, we can't tell where the focus is. So where that critical focusing point is. So what can we do about it? Let's see. Okay, here we have two images of the same keyboard. On the left, as we see it through the viewfinder of the camera with red focus peaking on. And on the right is a still shot from the same position. Both are shot at f16. So what we're going to do now is zoom into the middle and take a look and see if it's sharp as predicted by the focus peaking. And yes, allowing for the high ISO, the keys in the middle are sharp. And it is shown as being sharp in the viewfinder by the red peaking. Now let's move up to the end of the keyboard. It's still shown as sharp by the red focus peaking, but look at those keys. They're not sharp. They're out of focus. They're beyond the depth of field range, despite the fact the camera shows them as being sharp. So when you're stopped right down with a Voigtlander lens and you're trying to use one of the focusing aids like peaking or split image or prism, whatever you're using, keep in mind it was designed for being used while wide open, and it is not that effective when stopped down. We have to look at some other approaches to ensure our pictures are in focus. So let's get into that right now. So you can see the nature of the problem. When you start to stop down a Voigtlander lens as opposed to a Fujifilm lens, the area shown as in focus by focus peaking or the split image or the prism, whichever method you want to use, is just gets larger and larger and larger. And in the shot where I was showing at f16, it looked like the entire keyboard was going to be in focus according to focus peaking. But when you look at the still image, you can see a lot of it is out of focus. So you could actually think you're focusing and capturing everything, and you're not if you're relying on focus peaking and one of these Voigtlander wide angle lenses stopped way down. So as soon as you get in that scenario, all those aids are just basically useless to you because Fujifilm has engineered them to operate wide open, not stop down. So when they get stopped down, they're not really all that accurate. Yeah, the focus point is in there somewhere, but you can't be sure exactly where it is. So what do we do? Well, one way to do this is if you're going to be using stop down wide angle lenses a lot, I would turn off the focusing aids and just go with standard. I think the focusing aids can actually be a bit confusing when you're wide open with one of these wide angle lenses. Sorry, stop down with one of these wide angle lenses. So one thing you can do is you can open them up all the way to f2 on this case, or f2.8 in this case. Put your camera on aperture priority, get your focus wide open, then stop down to the aperture you actually want to use. That's one way to do it. Bit clumsy, but it'll work. The other way is just to take all the focusing aids off, stay on standard, and pay attention to your distance scale in your viewfinder. And use that as much as anything else. So estimate your distance to the subject and set it accordingly on the focusing scale inside the camera. And then you can confirm that by, looking at the focusing aids with, depending on which one you're using. As I say, it gets to the point where I think standard, which is no aids, is probably the best one. It's like ground glass on the old film cameras. That's probably as good as anything once you stop down with these. So I would suggest the big thing is you be aware that as soon as you start stopping down, it becomes progressively harder to nail the focus. And I found this time and time again, is if I was wide open, it was easy, or close to wide open, it was easy. And if I was stopped down, f11, f16, f22, it got progressively harder and harder to figure out where that best focus point was. And so a lot of it is a bit soft. Because keep in mind, when you're talking about depth of field, it's not like everything's in perfect focus and then it drops off a cliff. No, the further away you are from the best focus point, it will be less sharp. It will still be considered sharp enough to be in focus according to a depth of field scale. But the reality is the ends of the depth of field scale are much softer than the best focus point, which is somewhere roughly 1/3 out from the camera. In that range. You'll see it in the diagram what I'm talking about. You've got more depth of field behind the subject than you do in front, basically. So you either set it up by shooting wide open at first, getting your focus, then stopping down, or I'd pay attention to the distance scale and your depth of field markings in the camera to figure out where you should be placing your focus. Because if you're working on f22, f16, f11, good luck getting that best focus point where you want it to be. So if you're getting a lot of soft results out of your Voigtlanders, it's not because there's anything wrong with the lens. It's because they stop down rather than stay wide open when you're trying to focus. And when you do that, the more you stop down, the harder it gets to nail that best focus position. And, so you have to be aware of it to get your money's worth out of these lenses. Once you're aware of it, you either use it wide open, get your focus, and then bring your aperture to where you want it, or you use that distance scale inside the camera. So keep that in mind the next time you're out with one of these and you can't get it to focus properly. Cheers.